I want to invite you into the Gospel of Mark, and before everyone cheers audibly, this is Mark chapter 8, and it's an invitation to this space where Jesus is teaching. And so listen with me to the Gospel of Mark. Then he began teaching them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise. He said all of this quite openly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning again at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not to divine things, but to human things." And he called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, they must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake, for the gospel, will save it. For what will it profit to gain the whole world and forfeit their life?" Jesus has been teaching crowds and folks and people, and this is a moment where Peter gets really upset, and it's kind of a famous moment where Peter has sort of a really vital or vivid come to Jesus meeting where Jesus actually calls him Satan. And I looked, Jesus doesn't call anybody Satan at all in the Gospels except Peter. So it's a big deal. I'm just going to lead with that. Well, he does refer to like some demons that are, harming people's well-being as Satan, but like not, he doesn't even call the chief priests or Pontius Pilate or any of those powerful guys Satan. So we're gonna dive in. Now, to be fair to Peter, things have been going great. Everything's looking great. It's on the up and up. Everybody's being healed. People are enjoying themselves. They're eating food on the hillsides. People are being fed. And Peter has just before this correctly identified that Jesus is the Messiah, the anointed one, this one that they have been hoping for. Good job, Peter. And then Jesus starts teaching something that doesn't feel quite like this Messiah-y thing is happening or working right. And Jesus knows that the values he holds are different from the values of those who have power. Primarily the Roman Empire, managed by their political, religious establishment. And he is wise to know that this will not end well for him. That when you disrupt the economy, when you disrupt people's norms, they will not stand for that for long. Jesus is bringing healing out to people, and it's not because healing didn't exist or because he's so special. It's because healing in the style that Jesus did it existed, but in the temples. That's just my PSA for any time you read a healing story in the Bible. We should think of it as a different technology. We shouldn't think ancient people are somehow dumb, and that obviously they didn't know anything about their bodies or feeling better. If you go to ancient temples, you can see outside of them people make little statues when they receive healing, and they dedicate it to the temple. Like when I was in Greece, there were temples that had there were museums that had ears because someone regained their sight, and a leg or a knee or an elbow, and it's a style. Jesus is healing people and feeding people and teaching people to hold on to these shared values that engage in life in a way that doesn't require them to participate in the Roman economy in the same way. And so he's teaching that he will suffer and die. And Peter says no, that is not it. And some commentators say that actually he says shut up. I don't know if, I feel like they're probably just being shy about what that shut up should mean. Peter pulls Jesus aside and says, "Shut up, no. This is not what happens to a Messiah." And that's where Jesus looks back at Peter and uses the same "shut up" and then calls him Satan. Get behind me. These are not the values that we're working with. It's all kinds of confusing. It's full of paradox that this life to be lived has to be shared or given up in some way. It's this conflict in values, this sense of Roman domination and control and stuff and power, and Jesus offering instead this space of risk for others, of absolute vulnerability, of communal sharing and power sharing. When Jesus says that they will have to take up their cross, they don't live in a world where crosses are everywhere and decorative. They don't live in a world where you can drive down an interstate and see a giant one just off to the side. They don't live in a world where crosses are bedazzled or gold or valuable or pretty. Crosses are this ultimate sign for them of Rome's violence. And so Jesus takes this message to its most extreme consequence of crucifixion, this shameful, humiliating, violent public death. Now, this cross image has often been taken up as a part of our culture about why the cross matters, about being in relationship with God, about being at one with God happening through this violent death. But it's not a factor for human sin, but a reminder of human sin. This crucifixion is the ultimate reminder of human brokenness, human sinfulness, human harm to one another. And Jesus bears it for work, for others, with others, knowing that unless he stops the work he is doing, he will not survive. This message is astoundingly hard to the people who have been following him. They figure out that this is special and lovely and beautiful, and just as things are really cooking, they're like, oh, everything's going to get hard, really hard. And so we're invited into this season as well. That faith is something that invites us to be vulnerable, to take courage, to risk, and to remember in this season, it's probably hard for us to imagine that level of risk. We live in a context, in a culture where we might like to imagine ourselves among the disciples, but with our privilege and our resources as a nation, as individuals, we're probably a lot more like Rome. This is where white Christian nationalism gets really tricky with our church tradition, because there's so much of it that makes you talk about and think about and listen to vulnerable voices and take them in, like these disciples that will be scattered and harmed and hurt. It can be easy for folks to manipulate that message and to say, oh, Christianity is under attack. I was at the unicameral, and one superintendent of a Christian school in Lincoln named that he must arm his teachers because Christianity is under attack, that there's a war on Christianity, and in his schools, they must arm the teachers. And Jesus certainly talks about this vulnerability and this space. But it is certainly different for us 2,000 years later. His message lives differently in us, in our context, as we are. This season of Lent is about unpacking that, about exploring that, about listening deeply to ourselves and to the world, and being honest about what solidarity with vulnerable people means, being honest about our mortality and loss, being open to a space of struggle that is real and hard and meaningful, even as it's unlikely to involve any kind of cross. We are invited into this work together. May we have the courage. May it be so. Amen.